morning, ladies. Welcome to Growing Together in Grace. I'm Kathy.
I'm Ellen.
And we're so glad you're here with us this morning. We are recording these next two episodes back to back, and it's in the morning.
Yeah, it's morning time.
Not evening. And that's just because we had this day available, and we invited Chad and Ellen over for breakfast and thought, well, let's just do some episodes while we're at it.
Yeah.
So,
I'm excited.
This episode is going to be a book discussion, which we'll get into in just a second because we have a funny story about this. But before we get into the book discussion, Ellen, tell us how your week has been going.
So my week has been one of those weeks. So we had Monday off. It was like a fall day off. And then the kids had Tuesday off, but the teachers had to go to school. So we did planning all day Tuesday, and then we had the kids for 3 days. And so I do love holidays, days off. But in the backside of it, it's like, oh my gosh, this week is crazy. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to get things done. I have deadlines. I got told this week that I have an extra responsibility on my job because it came down from the district, and it's like,
because they're short on staff, and so they're just piling it on to other people.
Yes, we are. The math specialist and I are helping with walkthroughs. So essentially, we help like calibrate the walkthroughs, make sure teachers are, like doing what they're supposed to be doing, all those different things. But it doesn't necessarily count towards their evaluation, but we are still supposed to show that we're doing walkthroughs. And so the math specialist and I have anywhere between 7 and 8 teachers a week to do 5-minute observations. But honestly, you can't really do a 5-minute observation on somebody. So, and it's just like, what we saw, what we loved, like you were wondering about something, but still, that's about 45 minutes to an hour out of my time, extra time. And it literally, that kind of was like, okay, I got to adjust my schedule again. But anyways, it's just a long, short week. It always is a long, short week. I mean, I don't know why, but anyways, that's how it is. And we're busy this weekend, but I'm just thankful for the weekend,
Yeah.
I'm tired during the week, but I'm just so thankful to be able to refresh over the weekend. Yeah. What about you, Kathy?
Okay, for me, Jason was in Chicago this week. I'm not sure I shared this. No, I didn't, because we didn't record this past week. Before Jason left for Chicago, he badly injured his hand, so I had to take him to the emergency room.
I know you texted me. I was like, oh my goodness.
He ended up getting, I believe, 6 stitches on his right index finger. And then the rest of the week, we spent time with some friends watching the Astros.
Woohoo!
Go Astros!
Yes.
We watched them finally win. I wasn't sure we were going to win.
I was at Awanas, thank God. I don't think I would have been able to handle that.
Oh, you should have seen me. We were at the Rowans, and I was like,
oh.
I was just like, a lot of that.
No.
And then I think I said this the last time we were recording, that we had made an offer on a home.
Yes.
And that we were under contract.
Yes.
Well, long story short, we're still under contract. We had to pay a little bit extra to extend our option period because in the general inspection report, there was some questions that our inspector wanted us to get to the bottom of.
Yeah.
And so we ended up hiring plumbers to come out and do a hydrostatic test, which ended up failing. And I'm like, really?
Oh.
And so we were like, okay, well, that means it could be a major problem or a minor problem.
Yeah.
But if it's a major, we need to know that.
Right.
And so we've been in discussion with the sellers, and they extended the option period yesterday the plumbers were out there all day doing a hydrostatic isolation test. Sorry, I'm bumping this. And they did find some problems, but we don't have the full report yet. And so we probably won't know until Monday. And so here I am. I sent a text to my mom and my mother-in-law, and I was just like, I just feel like this whole year has been a season of waiting.
Yeah.
And I keep thinking about
you.
I keep thinking about the fact that at the beginning of the year, which I've shared on the podcast and talked with Ellen, the two things that I'm praying for my family is hoping in the Lord and peace in the Lord. And it's almost like God's like, you know what? I'm going to spend this year teaching you what that means. And the way you're going to learn that is waiting in me and trusting in my perfect timing.
Yeah.
But, ooh, boy, howdy. I'm like, okay, I feel like I got this lesson, Lord. So that's one thing. I haven't even told you this yet. So you can be praying.
Okay.
I don't think I told you this, but my mom came home from work on her lunch break. Yes, 2 days ago, and found him to be talking funny and not being able to move well. And she checked she's a nurse. She checked his vitals, and they were okay. They weren't great, but so the ambulance came and got him, and they ran a few tests, and it was very clear that things are not great. So they life flighted him to Barnes in St. Louis.
Okay.
Anyway, he had to go. He had an emergency surgery, which was like 8-hour surgery.
Oh my goodness.
He's in ICU. Like, I haven't heard an update today.
Okay.
So we're just praying he gets through and makes it through. We're still unsure, and it might be that we're moving our Thanksgiving trip. Like, we won't be going home for Thanksgiving this year. It could be that we're going home sooner.
Got it.
Under circumstances that I wouldn't want to go home. But
I understand.
Anyway, so that's been my week. A husband was out of town. My grandfather's not doing great, and we're still in the process of trying to find this house.
Oh, and you have been sending prayer requests, and I've just been praying for y'all. I know this has been. I've been watching you. I mean, Chad and I have been watching you guys go through this process, and it's like I feel like I'm like going it literally with you. I'm like, oh, so frustrating. Oh no.
We'll survive.
Yeah,
we'll survive.
The Lord has the perfect house for you. There's something there for you. I know it.
Anyway, okay, so we're gonna. That's the update for Ellen and I this week. Now let's jump into this episode. So this episode, what we are finishing this week, we will be releasing part 2 on patience.
Yes.
And then that will end our conversation series for now. We'll bring back a conversation series. Later. But this next series we're going to be doing is on marriage. And the way we wanted to start that was by opening it up.
That's why I'm looking at her going, oh my God, this is like hilarious.
By opening it up with a book that we've read together. The same book that we've read together.
Oh, gracious.
So, several months ago, I sent her a list of some books, and then I happened to be, I love thrifting, and I happened to find this book that Ellen has.
Things I Wish I'd Known Before We Got Married by Gary Chapman.
So, I found this book. I found 2 copies of it. I'm like, oh, this is not like $12 brand new, and it's like $1. I'm going to pick up these 2 books. Notice how I said 2 for Ellen and me. And I was like, hey, you want to read these? She's like, yeah, that'd be great. Let's read them and we'll discuss them on the podcast.
Yeah.
So several weeks later, we start reading our
books.
Our books. And Ellen sends me this quote, or like, this book is so great. And she says something about like, it would be great for...
This is a great book for people who are about to get married.
And I'm like, what? Like, I mean, the book that we're reading that I think we're reading together. I was like, I mean, maybe I could see how she would think that, but I'm really struggling trying to figure out how it would be a great like engagement pre.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what? So then she finishes her book, and I kept thinking, I haven't even told you this. I'm like, she finished that book fast. I'm still making my way through it. Lo and behold, my friends, she texts me either a quote. Oh, no. I saw on her Goodreads that she finished it and rated it. I was like, uh-oh. I think we didn't read the same book.
She texts me. She goes, okay. So obviously we did not read the same marriage book. I'm like, what do you mean? You gave me this book and we said we were going to read it. She goes, no, this is the book that I'm reading. And so she sends me the screenshot and I'm like, oh, you're so right. This was not the book that we were supposed to be reading together.
So ironically, I'm pretty sure, let me check real quick on my Goodreads. I'm pretty sure the book I am reading is still a book by Gary Chapman.
Is it really? Oh, that's funny.
Let me confirm.
I like him though. He's a good author. I actually brought 2 books. One that I'll share a little bit with.
I thought I put it on here. Maybe I didn't. I'm pretty sure he wrote the book I'm reading as well.
Okay.
So there's a little background story into this. I'm going to engage as much as possible with Ellen in regards to like our book discussion. You might, I think on this side, you might want to push it down. There you go.
There we go. I was like, it's falling off my head. Hopefully my hair's not sticking out.
So it's going to be mostly Ellen, but I might be able to like engage some with some things that she shares.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the little fun background story of our book discussion. We will end the series though with
her book.
My book.
Yes.
So
yes.
That said, Ellen, I'm going to put the camera on you because I'm going to ask you questions, but then if I start to engage, you can switch to me.
Yeah.
So, who would you say this book is directed towards? Like, who could benefit from reading this book?
So honestly, this book, it's called Things I Wish I'd Known Before We Got Married. It's by Gary Chapman, which I really have enjoyed reading his books because I reread another one and I'll talk about that in a minute. So I think honestly, this book is geared towards people who are thinking about getting married.
Okay.
Are getting close to that step of like, getting engaged or whatever. Okay. And this is a pretty good book, I feel like, for premarital counseling.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I'm reading through this book and I'm just like, I wonder why Kathy chose a premarital book. Okay. Well, all right, fine. I'll just read it. It's fine. But for me, I mean, I've almost been married for 30 years. I mean, we're going to be celebrating our 30th anniversary in July. I'm reading through this book and I'm thinking, wow, these are some great things to think about and even ponder because there is discussion questions here, which is why I said I feel like it's a really good book, like premarital counseling, because there are discussion questions at the end of each chapter where the couple is called talking it over.
Okay.
And it's like, it could be anywhere probably 4 to 6 questions that they discuss. And I think like when you come back for the next session, you discuss the answers, discuss with each other, you know, what they feel about those different questions. Like they're great questions, I feel like.
Well, you know, the great thing is your children are getting close to the marrying age and you did just have a daughter who got married. So you might be able to find that this book is useful to help you encourage your kids.
Yes. And this might be something because my daughter, they've just been married over a year.
Yeah.
And so even if you're just newly married, I think that this would be a pretty good book to even just read.
Yeah.
To kind of, because you're just starting out. So, I mean, I think that this would be a good book for also people who are just newlyweds and still trying to figure out each other. Yeah. Yes, definitely.
Anyway, all right. Well, so that leads me into the next question. What would you say the purpose of this book is?
again, I feel like because Gary Chapman in the first chapter talks about, I love how he introduces the first chapter's an introduction, but the first chapter is I wish he titles it I wish I had known in every chapter, and then he puts like a topic subject there. So the very first chapter is I wish I had known that being in love is not an adequate foundation for building a successful marriage. And I feel like, because he even talks about it in the book, that a lot of times people get married because they have that feeling of love. And actuality, because I think he quotes it in the book, I believe he says like that feeling goes away. I wouldn't say it goes away, but like it starts that high feeling like you have to be around that person 24/7 goes away after like 2 years. And so the reason why there's so much divorce is because people cannot get past that I feel love stage, because there's so many different aspects of love. You know, love is learning to love that person for their faults, you know, not giving up on that person because they have faults, you know. It's also, I feel like the purpose is for people who are about to get married or had just gotten married, is to think about some of the major things that couples truly struggle with when they do get married, because they don't really think about these different situations. Because even as I'm reading through the book, I'm like, oh, wow, you know, I never thought about that. Because your upbringing, and then you getting married to another person who has maybe a completely different upbringing, you're learning to get along with each other. And you got to realize that you probably have not lived with this person. So you're having to learn this person. And so getting to know the different aspects of their life before they get married, like, I think he brings a really good point of, hey, if you're thinking about getting married or just now married, these are some things you really need to have a discussion about, because you have the discussion, the front part of the marriage, and you see like your differences. That's another thing. Some people just get married because they love each other and they don't really see that they truly have differences, specifically like your belief system. Oh, I never grew up going to church. I don't think we should go to church. Well, I grew up going to church, like, you know, finances, those different things. So it's just something that these things that people should think about while just first being in newlyweds and even just about to get married. Because honestly, and he even mentions it in the book, he goes like, if there's too many differences and you guys cannot come to an agreement on something, you really need to have this discussion or even think about not getting married.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
you know, it's interesting you say that, and I'll talk about this in our next episode, specifically about conflict. I would definitely say one of the hardest aspects of our marriage at the beginning part of our marriage was conflict, because my husband grew up in a home where you dealt with the conflict.
Yeah.
You didn't go running into your room and shut the door and not come out.
Yeah.
You didn't like push it under the rug. You didn't do whatever you could to be at peace. Like, even if that meant you were compromising yourself. Like, I think about an example of like, if there's an ice cream that you love, but your husband doesn't, and he loves this. I grew up in a home and you pick the ice cream your husband loves, even though you don't like it. Oh. So like, because it was kind of, hey, we're peacemakers. We're peacemakers. And so there's some good aspects of learning to be a peacemaker, but there's some, it could be to your detriment. And so the first couple of years of our marriage, it was, I would always say yes to Jason because that's what I was taught, not told necessarily, but taught, and what was modeled. Yeah. And then I was slowly kind of like hurting inside because I wasn't like voicing my thoughts and my opinions, even though I was still wanting to be a submissive wife. Like, I want to follow my husband's lead. Yeah. Yeah. So definitely. I would definitely say for us, it would have been so great if we had more counseling on conflict and how do we handle conflict, because that rocked our marriage the first few years of like learning how to work through conflict and disagreement. 16 years into the marriage now, for the most part, we've learned how to handle it. There are still moments where I'm a little bit dramatic.
Yeah. Girl.
No surprise there.
I'm dramatic too, so it's okay.
Anyway, I say all that to say, there's lots of things I would have loved to discuss more and think through more before we got married.
Yeah, there's lots of things that people don't think about before they get married. Yeah. They honestly don't. Yeah. But anyways.
Okay, so, and maybe this next question, you could even just read the chapters if you want, but what are some themes that you saw throughout this book?
I really did enjoy the themes. So I'll just go to the table of contents. So the themes that I saw throughout this book were, the first one was, being in love is not an adequate foundation for a marriage. That romantic love has 2 stages. So it actually goes through the stages of love.
Okay.
When you start dating. And then that saying, like mother, like daughter, and like father, like son, is not a myth. I was like, okay. How to solve disagreements without arguing. That apologizing is a sign of strength. That forgiveness is not a feeling. Toilets are not self-cleaning. And so I love these because like some of them I'm like,
I want to know that chapter.
But that chapter is actually a chapter about, like the different roles in your household. Well, my spouse grew up, just giving an example of what he gave here. Well, my dad cleaned the toilet bowl when I was growing up. Well, I'm cleaning the toilet bowl, but then the wife's coming from a background of the mother cleaned the toilet bowl. So like, it's just those little mini things like, well, who does the dishes? Well, you're the woman, you should do the dishes. Things like that, like the different roles for husband and wife. Handling money. Ooh, to me, that was a good chapter because we struggled with finances like the first 10 to 12 years of our marriage. It was rough. Mutual sexual fulfillment is not automatic. So it's like sexual intimacy there. Marrying into a family. Spirituality, going to church, your beliefs there. Personality is influenced by behavior, so your different personalities. And then it says here, developing a healthy dating relationship. So maybe also this book could be for people who are seriously dating. And like perhaps this might be a next step before you get engaged. But there is a chapter there about developing a healthy dating relationship.
Okay.
So those are the different themes. I liked the different themes. They were really good. And even being married almost 30 years, I actually did go, some of those chapters hit really close to home to me because some of these things were the things that Chad and I struggled with when we first got married. And it was like, man, I really wish that I would have known some of this stuff before we got married or like gotten pre-counseling.
Yeah.
Marital counseling. Now, we did have premarital counseling, but because we lived in 2 different states,
it was a little different.
It was different. And we could only do the counseling when he was able to come into town because, his best friend married us. So, his friend was the one that was doing the counseling for us. So we didn't get to have like the more in-depth counseling that we probably should have had.
Okay.
Before we got married, but we did have premarital counseling. So,
all right.
Anyways.
Okay. So my next question for you about this book.
Sorry, I'm having to
you're fine.
Fix this. Hopefully my hair's not sticking up.
No, I think it's fine.
Okay.
I think it's fine. I say that, y'all, in like, what was it, episode 1 or 2? We had like hair problems. It was the whole thing.
And then I had that chocolate mole on I had that chocolate mole on my face.
I call it the Cindy Crawford mole. Literally, just big old. Now y'all gonna go watch that episode.
I'm not gonna tell you which episode that is.
Good times. Okay, so my next question for you, Ellen, is what did you like about the book? And then the follow-up question is going to be, what did you not like about the book? So if you want to just share quickly with those two, that'd be great.
So what I liked about the book is I like the fact that these generated really good topical questions for people who are considering getting married.
Okay.
Some serious things, which I think he even might allude to in the book. He might have even mentioned, it's been a minute since I've read this book, that these are some of the real things that he's been, because Gary Chapman is a marriage counselor.
Okay.
And he's wrote several books about marriage. These are the things that he sees people come into his office to deal with.
Okay.
Like they are struggling really with these different types of conflicts that they've had in their marriage because they didn't realize or think about these different topics before they got married.
Okay.
And so that's what I really like about this book is that he literally breaks down these different things that he's seen over the years. He's seen couples come into his office for because he's really done a lot of study on marriage. He's done conferences on that. He's written several books about marriage. So he's really gotten down to the nugget of these are a lot of the things that couples struggle with that they don't really discuss before they get married. And so I love this book. This is probably one of the books that I would recommend to somebody who's seriously dating or like about or engaged in doing premarital counseling. Like this is a really good book that maybe you should discuss with the person that's giving you premarital counseling. So I like the way he broke this down and explained it to me because again, I've been married for almost 30 years. These are some things that I did not think about.
Yeah.
Some of the things that maybe I didn't like so much, I wouldn't even say some, but maybe one of the things in here is like the saying like mother, like daughter. That's one of the chapters. Like father, like son. Although there was some truth to it, people who are coming from different situations, like I was thinking about you when I read this chapter because you came from a background that like you grew up in a situation where you went through a lot of things growing up or like you dealing with abuse and all that. And so I was thinking about you because I'm like, well, you know, you came to realize like, you know, there was some things like in your family history, but you for yourself had to go through a lot of things to change that. So sometimes that's not necessarily true. I think like if people grew up in trauma, you know, and they realize that they grew up in a family with trauma in it, that they're not necessarily going to be like their parents. I believe like in breaking the cycle, feel like you broke the cycle. Yeah. So like people who are coming from a background of abuse or traumatic childhood experiences, you can break the cycle. You know, for that, you're not necessarily going to be like your mom or your dad.
You know, it's interesting you say that. Before you came, I jumped over on Goodreads to look briefly at some reviews so I can kind of get an idea of what the book was about. And that was probably the biggest dislike that I was reading in reviews, that particular chapter on like mother, like father. Yeah. Because it is true. Like there obviously are some aspects that are influenced, right? Like we are influenced by our environment. But that doesn't mean that Christ can't come in and transform it, redeem it, and restore it. Right. Like he has done with me. Like there are moments where I see my biological mom creep up. Like, in the sense of like her being impatient. And but I mean, what mom isn't impatient, right? But like her impatience would turn into anger and then would turn into abuse. Yeah. But because of Christ in me, like I have the strength and the power through the Holy Spirit to put that off. Yes. And put on Christ. Like, okay, I'm not going to let this affect me to where I'm angry and now beating my child. Like that's abuse and unloving. You know what I'm saying? Right. So, you know, like you said, there are some stories where people aren't like their mother and father, and praise God for that.
Yes.
And then there are times where it's like, hey, you are so like your mom, and that's amazing because, your mom loves Jesus and loves, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly.
So
exactly.
I found it interesting when you said, I was like, oh, that's funny because that's a lot of people's like pushback on that particular chapter.
Definitely.
Okay. My next question then would be, would you recommend this book?
Yes, I would recommend it to like somebody who's considering marriage, doing premarital counseling. I mean, and not even necessarily that. Like if you want to go back, because I have had some conversations with Chad. Like there is a whole chapter in here about apologizing and forgiveness. And he actually talks about it because he did a book about the 5, because he refers to this book, The 5 Love Languages, which I read years ago, but I reread it again while I was reading this book. And I love this. Talks about the 5 love languages that, some people may have. You may even have 2 that are strong love. It's to how you show your love to your person, like acts of service, physical touch, giving gifts. And I can't remember the other 2.
Was there time?
Yes.
Spending time?
Yes.
I don't remember the 5th one.
Yeah. Anyways, I mean, they're both great books. And he talks about the 5 love languages in this book. And then he also did a book about the 5 languages of apologizing. And so
that particular chapter caused and generated discussion for you and
Chad? Because I'm like, and it saw in myself, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so like this. And Chad's so like this. And then I think I even had the discussion of, have you seen an improvement with me? Because I've really been trying to work on a lot of things on myself. And one of them is I grew up in a home that we didn't apologize.
Yeah.
And so I've really tried to instill that and just be like, not so quick to anger and just be like, I'm sorry, I raised my voice. Just different things like that. Like, just been a couple of discussions that Chad and I have had. And I'm like, oh my gosh, so it's not bad for a couple that's been married for a long time, but because you can have those discussions, but really, I think it's geared towards dating
with the intention of getting married.
Yes.
Couples. Okay.
Yes.
All right, then. Did you have a favorite chapter or quote in that book?
Oh, yes. I had a couple of favorite chapters here. I actually have to go look at the table of contents. Apologizing is a sign of strength. This was, for me, an eye-opening chapter because I think I've shared it in one of our podcasts, and what I just shared a little bit ago was that I grew up in a house where there was anger, a lot of like, not, if a harsh word was said, there was not an apology afterwards. It was, we're just gonna get through. It's one and done. There was not an, I'm sorry for speaking to you that way, or I'm sorry for getting angry at you, so I grew up not knowing how to say I'm sorry. And I slowly realized that throughout my marriage. My husband was always the one that was apologizing. And even in one of the chapters, it's like he's the one that just apologizes just to apologize. Because I think it's just, he's gets tired of arguing with me. Okay, well, I'm sorry if you felt like this. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's my husband. And oh my God, I feel like a horrible wife now because he just apologized just to stop the conflict. So he wouldn't. So that was really eye-opening to me. And then also the money one. Oh my gosh, we struggled with money. And I was thinking in my head, what if we had this and we were discussing financial money, we would not have been in the situations that we were in. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was just to the point one time in our marriage, we went through bankruptcy. It was bad.
Yeah.
Finances were bad. So I like really those 2 chapters, and I can feel this
sliding.
Fixing it. Sorry, y'all.
Oh, you're fine.
Okay. And I'm still on 1. Okay. So anyways, those were my favorite chapters. And this one forgiveness does not destroy our memory. You can forgive someone, that's still always going to be in your mind. You could choose to forgive and you forgive them, but that's always going to be in your mind. And sometimes that could affect forgiveness. But those were my favorite things out of the book.
Okay, so Ellen, you mentioned at the beginning of this podcast that you will have been married for 30 years come July.
Yes.
And you read a book that's probably geared for people who are about to get married.
Yes.
So my question would be, did you find this book to be a nice reminder and refresher for you?
Yes, definitely. And even for me, in a lot of these things in this book, it was things that I didn't really think about or realize until I read it. So honestly, in some aspects, this was eye-opening to me because I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so true. Mm-hmm. That's so true. Some of the things that he mentions throughout these different chapters, I'm like, oh, that was us in our marriage. Yeah. And it was always, I wish I would have had this book because it just would have made my marriage so much easier at different points of life because we struggled through some of these things.
Yeah.
You know, I do. It's also reminding me of how far we've come in our marriage.
Praise God.
You know, we've been married for almost 30 years, but it's just, it hasn't been easy at times. There have been some really, really tough and rough patches, with a lot of struggles, and even to the point sometimes where, you know, either him or I were like, okay, we have a serious problem here. We need to discuss this or there's just going to be even more issues. Mm-hmm. But it's a reminder to me of where we were when we started in our marriage and how much we have grown with each other, with getting through different circumstances and situations where, like, if we were to deal with some of these different things when we first got married, I don't know how we would have dealt with them. But because the Lord allowed us to go through some of these difficult circumstances when we first got married, I don't think we would be where we are in our marriage now. Mm-hmm. And so it reminded me of God's grace and glory throughout our marriage and how much closer we've grown in the last 30 years. And in fact, I've joked with my husband. I'm like, oh my gosh, it took us almost 30 years to figure out this. This is ridiculous. Golly. But it's so much
God,
sweeter.
Though, man. Yeah, praise God for his faithfulness.
Yes, yes.
My last question for you was, is this an easy book to read?
I actually, see?
I wonder why those are being funky on you today. I wonder if we've switched headphones. Next episode, I'll switch with you, see if that works.
It actually was really an easy read because he made the concepts, the topics relatable.
Okay.
And made you really think about them. And I love the discussion questions at the end.
Okay.
It's pretty simple.
Okay.
There is a lot of information there, but
it was simple information.
To me, it was simple. Maybe because I've been married for so long.
Okay.
Maybe it might be a lot to think about for somebody who's getting premarital counseling. That might be a lot of things to think about, but still, I mean, they're good things to think about. Mm-hmm. I mean, people just don't think about it.
Roughly speaking, how long is each chapter?
Let's see. Really, anywhere between 6 to 10 pages, maybe.
Okay, so that's not too bad.
Yeah, and maybe a little bit more like.
And there's how many chapters did you say?
1, 2, 3. There's 14, but they're short. And then, like, you have an introduction, And then you have an epilogue. And also, too, here at the very end, like this didn't really relate to me because they do have a chapter on developing a healthy dating relationship.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that didn't relate to me very, because I'm not dating anymore. I'm married. So, again, this is why I said this is geared towards people that are about to get married or,
So it seems like it's a book that you can get through pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
I mean, it just took me a little bit because I just, I can read.
That too.
Yes. And guys, this pairs very well with this because he does talk about the 5 love languages. And I will actually, I love this. So it's the 5 love languages that Gary Chapman talks about is words of affirmation.
That's the one.
Yeah. Quality time, receiving gifts, acts of service, physical touch. So for me, and there's actually a quiz that you can take and your spouse can take to figure out what love language are. So mine is receiving gifts, and Chad's like, well, duh. He goes, I already knew that, and I already knew his. His was acts of service, and I'm like, duh. And then I think I think for tying for me for second was words of affirmation and quality time, and his second one I think was quality time.
Okay.
Yeah. And so he gives you pretty good tips on, it's like filling the love bucket.
Yeah.
Because people are wired differently.
Yeah.
People show love in different ways. And again, a lot of people don't realize that, but this is a great book. This is my second time reading it. I read this maybe 10 years ago and I didn't apply it really. I read it. I thought it was good. And I was like, I need to read that again.
Yeah.
So
I want to say something real quick about this and then we can end our episode. So before children, my top 2 love languages was physical touch and words of affirmation. And then my husband's was physical touch and then quality time. After children, for me, physical touch is like way down here because I feel constantly touched.
Yeah.
And so that can sometimes be kind of a struggle for Jason and me because he's very much a physical touch person.
Yeah.
And he'll want to come home and just like snuggle. I'm like, don't touch me.
Yeah.
I've been touched too much.
Yeah.
I'm like, but this is the way, like he likes that connection. And so I have to like push through some of it. And then he also has to like, show me love by allowing me not to be touched so much.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Yes,
anyway,
it does.
I have found that over time, sometimes love languages change. Like now my top 2 love languages would probably be quality time and acts of service because I don't want to be the only one. And this isn't true, but there are days where I feel like I'm the only one who's doing the laundry and cleaning the house and doing the dishes.
Yeah.
Because I'm home all day with the kids, right? And so now my top 2 is words of affirmation hasn't really changed.
Yeah.
And I think that's just because I grew up in a home where
you didn't
have that.
Yeah.
And so like that's my fallback of like I need to hear.
Yeah.
But I will definitely say now, acts of service is huge for me.
Yeah. Surprisingly for us, it hasn't changed.
Okay.
Although our second primary language has a little bit.
Okay.
Mine used to be physical touch for second, but it's more words of affirmation for me.
Okay.
And again, it also depends on what season of life you're in as well.
For sure.
His, I think the second time was quality time, whereas I think the first time it might have been physical touch.
Okay.
So you're right. It does change. But our first primary, I mean, we're both like, well, duh. I already knew that.
That's funny.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
Well, thanks, Ellen, for reading our book we were supposed to read together.
It was a good read, though. I really did enjoy it. It was just funny because...
And stay tuned for the book I read.
Right. Well, it's funny because I would discuss something from the book and she would always give me this weird look like,
what chapter are you?
Huh? And then we figured it out when I did my review on Goodreads. She was like, okay, I figured it out. We just read the wrong chapter. We just read the wrong books. I'm like, okay, that makes sense now.
Good times.
But the book that you were reading, you told me was probably geared more towards somebody that's been married longer, right? Like,
I would say it's definitely, I mean, I would probably still encourage somebody who's engaged to read it because it's called Sacred Marriage. But I don't feel like it's like a pre-engagement or engagement book. I feel like it's just about marriage as a whole. It's not necessarily going through like the counseling questions that it sounds like he's doing in this book. It's more just about what how your marriage can be holy and purposeful. And so
yes,
that will be the book I'm discussing, y'all. It's called Sacred Marriage. So there you go.
Yeah, her book review that I didn't get to read. Like, whoops.
So she'll be interviewing me next time. Anyway, whoops. Good times.
Yes.
Well, we're so glad you joined us this morning, and we look forward to talking to y'all next week. And we will see you guys later.
All right. Bye, ladies.
Bye. I'm Kathy.
I'm Ellen.